Hi friends, it's time for my October 2023 reading recap, and I'm going to be talking about every single book that I read in the month of October. To kick things off, we are going to start with Strike the Zither, which is by Joan He. This is about a strategist named Zephyr. She's the best one in the land, and somehow, in the course of her being the best one and employing a strategy, she ends up infiltrating an enemy camp where she encounters another fellow strategist that turns out might just be her match. This book was good. It surprised me in a way that I wasn't expecting. I don't think I thought the plot was going to go the direction that it did, but it did. And it was a good time overall just reading it. The author drew a lot of inspiration from history and like an epic, I believe, and that's very clear in the text. I like the changes that they made to it, and I did find the story really easy to read and really compelling. Don't necessarily think that it's one that would stay with me just because I feel like I was more attached to the plot than I was to the characters, and you know that for me, my favorites are usually stories where I love the characters and will follow them into whatever shenanigans they get into. But it was still a good time, and I'm looking forward to reading the sequel to seeing how this all wraps up and concludes. It's coming out in 2024, so not long now. Then, for my buddy read with Danica, I read A Dowry of Blood, which is by S.T. Gibson. This is this author's take on Dracula's brides, including how Costanta, who is the main narrator writing the letters, must decide which matters more to her, her love for her husband or her freedom. And I really liked the epistolary format that this story took on. It is from the point of view of Costanta. She's writing to the reader as if the reader was Dracula, and she's recounting her history, the history of the other bride, Dracula's treatment of them, all through these letters. And I thought that was really clever. It made everything seem more personal and intimate, and I think that works really well for the story. The thing that I just didn't really mesh with is a thing that I have really found this year to be a thing that doesn't work for me, and that's time skipping forward. I understand why it happened here because, like, vampires, they live long lives, and of course you can't spend every single day of every single year they're alive with them. So I get that, and it didn't make it a negative too much for me in the course of this story. Despite the beautiful writing and despite the fact that I really like the themes that this explored, it just didn't end up becoming a new favorite for me the way it has for other people, though I do still think that it was very cleverly done. The next book is a series conclusion, and that is Two Twisted Crowns, which is by Rachel Gillig. This is the finale to the Shepherd King duology, which started with One Dark Window. And right now, what's happening in the series is that, and this is a spoiler, if you don't want to know anything, I would suggest just skipping this review and going on to the next one. I'll leave a timestamp down below. But if you are sticking around, at this point, only one of the 12 Providence cards is missing, and Elspeth and Raven have to journey somewhere unexpected and dangerous in order to acquire it, and hope that they return in time to cure the kingdom of the dark magic that has befallen it. And I really like this book. I think it's because I love a journey quest story, and that's a big part of the plot. I also enjoyed getting more character perspectives in the story. I think it added a little bit of something into the tale, and they were really necessary in order to move the entire plot forward, considering all of the things that go on in the story. I definitely feel like it was a strong conclusion to the duology. In my opinion, you might have been able to mesh them up into one really long book, actually, instead of just having them separated into two. But I do find the way it ends pretty satisfying, and I am glad that it ended the way that it did, to put it mildly. Next, I read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which I'd been meaning to read for like ever. And I really don't want to say much about it, except that it is about an individual named Piranesi who lives in a house that he has mapped and explored very thoroughly. And I don't think you need to know much more than that going into it, because it's much better to just let things unfold on the page. It does really come together in an interesting way. I was really glad to finally satisfy my curiosity about the book. I do find that there were, turns of phrase and like different concepts that I thought were really interesting, but overall I was expecting to love it more than I did, I think. And I'm not sure yet if that has to do with the brevity of it or the way it's written. I think it's more the brevity of it and the fact that now that I don't know that I would read the book again, if that makes sense. I feel like it was like one of those things where I could read it once and that would be it, because I would have my curiosity satisfied. So that's how I feel about Piranesi. Though I do think it was worth reading. It's a really quick one too. Like, it's so short and it reads really fast just because of the way it's structured. A book I picked up on a whim because I was in the mood for some angst is Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. This is the first time I'm reading this author. It definitely will not be the last. The main couple in this one are Yasmin and Josiah. They thought that their love and their marriage would last forever, but when tragedy strikes their lives, they end up having their marriage fall apart and separating. They are separated, but still running their business together and co-parenting their kids together very successfully. And in this book, both go on healing journeys that might just give them a second chance at being together for the rest of their lives. And it's so, first of all, Kennedy Ryan's writing is so beautiful. I just fell right into it, and I found it very readable and ultimately could not stop. I loved her character work because getting to know Yasmin and Josiah was such a privilege and such an honor, and to see them work through and fight for the love that they both deserved. Chef's kiss, so good. Chef's kiss, so good. Like, I was so satisfied. I was so angsting with them, and I was so thrilled for them. And like, I went through the whole maelstrom of emotions reading before I let go, to be honest with you. And even though I did not cry, I did feel very deeply for these two characters. So much so to the point that I was like, I don't know why I'm not crying. Like, I think it was just because the whole time I'm like, I just want you guys to figure things out. I want you both to be happy. And like, it was just beautiful. The story was beautiful. The healing, the ups and the downs of that process, I think that's what really stood out to me even more so than the romance, though the romance was also very good. It was just wonderful, wonderfully done, and I'm so glad I read this. Next, for our family book club, I picked up Murder in the Family by Kara Hunter. This is a mystery thriller. The concept is that a cold case is given into the hands of a new set of experts to turn a fresh eye to in the hopes that they can locate new evidence, maybe come up with new conclusions, and solve the mystery, all while they're being filmed for a Netflix reality show. This is like a mixed media format book. You have emails, you have texts, you have video transcripts, you have all sorts of things. And when I first picked it up, the thing that had been pitched to me was that you were trying to solve the mystery alongside everyone else. I did not do that. I just let it unfold on the page because I was like, I just want to know what happens. I had a guess very early on about who had done it, and at some point I dropped that suspicion because I was like, maybe it's not, and then I moved on to something sort of adjacent to it, but then I kind of went back to it. Turns out I was right. Should have trusted my gut. But it was kind of fun to just follow along. It sort of felt like I was watching the Netflix show, and sometimes that's interesting to me. I think the format worked really well for what the story was, and I had a decent time reading it. Kept me entertained for sure, and it was really quick, so I'm glad I picked that up. Then I made a return to a world I love, and that was when I read The Chalice of the Gods, which is by Rick Riordan, and this is a return to the world of Percy Jackson. So in this one, Percy is about to graduate high school, but in order to, get into New Rome University, which is his goal, he has to complete 3 quests in order to earn 3 recommendation letters from Mount Olympus. The first quest is to help Ganymede, Zeus's cupbearer, retrieve his cup before it falls into the wrong hands. And you know what? This was just pure fun. I loved being back with Percy. I love the fact that he and Annabeth and Grover embark on this quest together. I like that it takes them around New York City. That was really entertaining. And as someone who is a big fan of the Percy Jackson universe, I think this was just like carried by nostalgia. Like, a lot of it still has the same signature style that Riordan has employed in all of his books that I've read so far this year. I've read the entirety of the Greek and Roman stuff, and it was just fun. It was just pure fun to be back with this group of characters. Is it the most memorable story I've read in this universe? No. Was it the most emotionally moving? Also no, but it was hell of a lot of fun, and I'm so glad it exists in the world, and that it came at a time when I needed something to bring me much joy. Next, I picked up A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. This is about Effie Sayre, who, as an architect student, has the opportunity to redesign the home of an author that she absolutely loves, who wrote her all-time favorite book when she wins a contest. But when she gets to this place to, assess it and to work on the plans, she crosses paths with a literature student named Preston Hellery, who is determined to prove that this author that she loves is actually a fraud and didn't write his book at all. So they end up teaming up in this investigation, and then they end up involved in something that has more dark forces at work than they anticipated. Ava Reed's writing is very readable, and I like the way she's woven themes into her story. She has a really good grasp of weaving magical aspects into a story that, for all intents and purposes, seems quite ordinary. It allows the reader to gain a new perspective on certain situations and certain understandings. It kind of gives us a fictionalized way of looking at things. And I thought that part was pretty compelling. It read really, really fast. And even though I kind of guessed as to where the ending was headed, I liked the journey of getting there because I was really swept up in Reed's writing style and how she chose to unveil the details of the story. She has a very great sense of atmosphere too, because I felt like that was such a big part of the story. There's this feeling that you're not sure what's real and what's not, and I think that unsettling vibe just permeated throughout the entire thing, both in physical descriptions and also just emotional experiences. And for that, I think A Study in Drowning is worth reading. Although, the one thing I will say is I do think it wrapped up rather quickly at the end, and I don't know if I wanted it to wrap up as neatly as it did. I don't know, maybe that's just a personal opinion thing. Anyway, the next thing that I read was Fortuna Sworn, which is by KJ Sutton. I've been meaning to read this one for a very long time because the concept of it sounds super interesting. Our main character, Fortuna, is, you know, determined to find her brother and to get him back, and then she ends up meeting this super powerful fairy who strikes a deal with her that if she upholds her end of the bargain, he's going to help her find her brother, and then she realizes she signed up for more than she's ready for. It's another fairy story. And you know me, I'm always fascinated by stories where the fairies are tricky and clever, but also not necessarily bound by human morals or ideas of what's wrong and what's right. And that's the case in Fortuna Sworn. It actually goes into some pretty dark places, which I don't think I was expecting. But overall, I did find it interesting. It's another situation where, like, she's living in the human world and then she gets taken into the world of fairy, finds her brother there, ends up getting involved in fairy politics. This is not a story that we haven't seen before, but I do think that Sutton has added enough of her own unique take on things to make it a little bit different, even though there are definitely some recognizable plot tropes and character tropes in it. I don't know yet if I'm gonna continue the series. I do kind of want to, but I don't know that it would be a priority for me at this point. But I'm glad I finally picked it up and gave it a try. I also picked up What the River Knows, which is by Isabel Ibanez, and I had a delightful time reading this one. It is about Inez Oliveira, and she ends up traveling to Egypt in order to discover the truth about her parents' death. She ends up instead being pulled into an adventure that's filled with history and magic and secrets that need to be uncovered. And it was a good time. It definitely had the vibes of The Mummy, like a National Treasure in a way, and I enjoyed that. I like the fact that Inez was like so headstrong, so determined to figure out what happened with her parents and to also try to understand why they were always in Egypt and always exploring that. She's drawn to it also in the same way that they are. I like that there's a very light fantastical aspect to it, but mostly I love that there's like shenanigans and adventures and secrets, and there's so much going on in that story that just kept me entertained. It kept me on the edge of my seat, and I was so curious about what would happen next. And honestly, the way it ends, like, I am just like, how am I supposed to wait until next year to know how this concludes? Like, someone tell me how. Suffice to say, I had a very good time reading that book. I was kind of hoping it would be a new all-time favorite, but it fell just a bit short of the mark for me, and that's probably, again, because in this one I was more fascinated by the lore and the plot than I was the characters, even though I did enjoy Inez, and I also enjoyed her love interest. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it remains to be seen. I think it will depend on how the next book goes in the series. Okay, I kind of want to save this next book. I was doing them in chronological order, but I'm going to save this next book for later because I have like lots to say about it. So for right now, we're going to talk about a novella and a first book in a series that I read. So the novella is called Bittersweet Love, and then the novel is called White Hot Kiss, and they're both part of the Dark Elements trilogy series by Jennifer L. Armentrout, which is one of her older YA series. And I had a bloody good time reading these. So White Hot Kiss is what I read first, and the main character, Layla, is half demon and half warden. Wardens are kind of like gargoyles. And she really just wants to live a normal life, but everything kind of gets upended after she meets Roth, who is a prince of hell, and also discovers that she's at the center of a demon plot. I was really entertained. I have said it to some other people, but I do feel like I have enjoyed most of Jennifer L. Armentrout's earlier works more than her current works. I think there's just something about the way she plots these YA novels, the interesting way she turns lore on its head and just combines things that I would not think to combine and kind of just runs with it in her stories. There's a freedom to that I quite enjoy. I love that even though I can recognize certain story structures and character types from her different stories, she does just enough to make them different from one another, and I feel like that's the case with this Dark Elements series. Like, I have loved the Lux series, I have loved the Covenant series, and now I am really enjoying the Dark Elements series as well. I really like the characters that she came up with. I think Layla is great, and I totally found her relatable and understood like how much she was going through because of her, you know, half and half nature, and also all of the shit that she put through in this book. I enjoyed meeting all the other characters in the story as well, and just like diving more into this lore and this world and just seeing how things would play out. It's sort of like watching a really good CW show. Like, this is the early season of it, and that's the vibe I get. So that was a good time. Bittersweet Love is about side characters that you hear mentioned in the first book, Des and Jazz, and it's basically their second chance romance. And it's really sweet and it's really cute, and I think I was fine reading it after reading the first book just because I had a little more context for the world and the things that, you know, are enemies in that world, and it was just a fun time, a good time. So far this series has been very entertaining for me. I reread or finished my reread of Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. Did some tabbing, or additional tabbing, because I had tabbed it already last year. Revisiting this first book just cements the fact that I love it. I love it so much. It is about Evangeline Fox, and at the very beginning of the story, she makes a deal with the Prince of Hearts, and then she ends up discovering that bargaining with the Fate is pretty much asking for more than what she thought he was asking for. She ends up traveling to the Magnificent North, and then finds herself at the center of a political and magical struggle and maneuverings, and has to find a way to her own happy ending. I think that's a pretty succinct way of describing this, but I enjoyed it. Like, clearly, all the tabbing aside, I just love the way that Stephanie Garber weaves fairy tale elements into a whimsical and magical story, and then she does things with them that aren't necessarily what you would expect. I love Evangeline. She is my favorite of Stephanie's main characters. I think there's something to be said for just who she is at her core and how she develops from the person she is at the beginning of this book to the end of this book that really, really, really appeals to me. Plus, obviously, I have a soft spot for Jax, who I quite enjoy as well. I think he's a great character. Yeah, it was a good time just revisiting this. And even though I knew every single thing that was going to happen in it, I was still like, well, I'm here for the ride. So, love this book so much. Love it. I am also going to say, talking about the book, I'm going to skip to the mangas. Oh no, you know what? We're going to talk about the book now, and then I'll do the manga. So the last book I want to talk about is probably it's my favorite book of this month, and probably my favorite thing I've read all year, or one of my favorite things I've read all year, and that is The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiro. A moment for this beautiful cover from Rainbow Crate, but also because I love this book so much, and it's kind of hard for me to talk about without just like, I don't know, devolving into, oh my god, it was so good! It was so good! Okay. Some calm. The Sun and the Star, kind of spoilery for anyone who has not read through the Trials of Apollo, so I'm going to try to keep this vague, but basically, Nico D'Angelo and Will Solis end up having to go down into Tartarus together in order to help a friend. I think that's as vague as I can get, but I loved this book so much. It literally took like a chapter or two and I was already like tearing up. That's how much I love it. It does help that I'm a little biased because Nico D'Angelo is one of my favorite, if not my favorite character in the Percy Jackson universe. And this book, centering around him and bringing him through such an emotional and important journey to sort of bookend a chapter in his life, so bloody satisfying, so good. It was really rough at times, but it was also necessary to see him go through all of this, and I just, my heart for Nico D'Angelo. And Will Solis, love that dude as well. Like, it was just, I really like that this story not only gives us the entertainment of having these two demigods work their way through Tartarus, figure out what they're going to do next, get into all sorts of messy shenanigans in the style of all the other Riordan verse books, but the fact that they actually have to go through some very hard stuff and to deal with them, you know, to deal with these lingering feelings or the things that in their past, and like to make sense of that and to weave that into an adventure story, like, it was everything. Like, I loved this book so much. I cannot express to you how much it meant to me to see Nico and Will and their story on the page and to watch all of it unfold. Whether it was the shenanigan moments or whether it was the moments where they had to be super vulnerable, like, everything about this book was my cup of tea. And I put off reading it for so long because I was so scared. I was so scared because I had such high expectations and high hopes for it. And it turns out I shouldn't have even been worried because this was a freaking 5-star book. I loved it so much. In fact, if I could give it 1,000,000 stars, I probably would. Probably my favorite thing in the entire Riordanverse at this point, just because I loved it so much. So much. So much. I feel like I can't emphasize that enough, but I love that book so much. Okay, quick run through the manga. I read the 4th volume of My Happy Marriage. It was still good, still made me squeal at certain points, and there were definitely panels that I was just like dying over. However, I do feel like I liked it less than the first 3, and that's probably because the 2 main characters don't spend as much on-page time together. So there's that. But I'm still continuing the series, obviously. And then I read the entirety of the Savior's Book Cafe story in Another World. It has 5 volumes. This is based on the light novel by Kyoka Izumi. The story is by Umiya and the art is by Reiko Sakurada. This was a great time. The main character is Sukina, and she is transported into another world in order to be its savior, basically isekai. And she ends up talking to the god that has transferred her over to this world, and she's like, I don't really want to be the savior. So he ends up giving her like the opportunity to run her dream like book cafe instead. And that's what she does. And it is delightful and utterly relatable. I love Sukuna as a main character because honestly, I would probably want to do the same. But not only that, she does still end up getting involved in this world's politics and the power plays that are going on with it. And I just had a great time following this through all the way to the last volume. Things did get a little rushed here and there because of the brevity of the series, I'm guessing, but it was still such a delight just to be with these characters. I loved watching her fall in love. I love seeing their relationship progress, and like whatever obstacles came their way, I like seeing them work through those things. So this was a good time. I'm also glad I read this entire series as well and would recommend checking it out. And that, my friends, was all the things that I read in the month of October. It was also a very good reading. Like, honestly, I cannot complain. I've had some bangers over this last couple of months. So if you have read any of these and have thoughts on them, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear. And if you are excited to read any of these or want to check them out, let me know which ones as well. And I will see you guys with a new video soon. Bye!